In the next couple minutes, I'm going to explain to you why that there will be a 100% chance of families being torn apart by civil strife within the family, and likely parts of the nation will have another new civil war. It is no secret that we are more politically divided in this nation than we have been in the history of this nation. And I'm going to ask you, don't click off after 1 minute. You need to see this video so you'll understand through the lens of psychology exactly what's happening and why it's happening. So if you're ready, let's get going. Today we're going to jump into the field of what's called social psychology. Everybody knows that people are passionate on both sides of the aisle right at this minute.
All right, this is getting serious. Oh my goodness.
Here's how it's going to affect your family and likely big parts of this country. Number one, you have to accept the fact that every single one of us have what are called cognitive biases. The big ones that are hitting us now are what are called in-group bias and out-group bias. Let me explain both very briefly. This is where we get the us versus them idea, because you're either in our group or you are out of our group. And if you're in our group, we will give you special treatment, and we will be happy when things happen to the other team and sad when they happen to you, because you're part of our group. And on the out-group bias side of the fence, this is where if you are not in our group, we are automatically against you and your ideals. But this is where it gets a little bit deeper. Let's start with the in-group side. When you're dealing with an in-group bias, the next level of that bias is what's called affinity bias. This is where you automatically like somebody more, or you develop a relationship more quickly with somebody who shares something in common with you. They're not only part of your group because they stand for what you stand for, but there's something additional as well. Like if you're interviewing for a job and you are an avid golfer, and all of a sudden you interview somebody and they are also an avid golfer. Because of affinity bias, you will likely want to hire them over anyone else because you share that thing. Now let's go back to the other side. If you are part of the people that are dealing with an out-group bias, this gets deep really quick, because now instead of going to the affinity bias, you will go deeper into what's called the out-group hate bias. This is a deeper level of people not being on your team. This is where politics gets ugly, because now you not only are us versus them because of basic things that you believe or basic things that you stand for. Now it is that you attribute evil or wickedness to the other side. Instead of just disagreeing, you're disagreeing at an evil, wicked, terrible level. Now, the deeper level from the affinity bias on one side and the outgroup hate bias on the other is where we get political identity bias. Now, make no mistake, before I tell you about how deep and ugly this gets, understand that your political identity bias can show up way up the chain before it gets ugly, just under the in-group and the out-group bias area. If you are a very neutral person and no animosity toward the other side, you may be able to, at this point, simply affiliate with the political group because you like what they stand for, but you're not ready to call the other side evil yet. So that's for neutral people, but that's not what we're dealing with today. So now we have our political identity bias being stuck under affinity on one side and out-group hate on the other side. And in case you're wondering, if you're at this level, you will literally choose this level of politics over your own family. Here's why. You will start to value your social group identity more than your familial identity. That means that as much as you may love your family, you can have violent splits and disagreements on political things in your own home with your own family. And what will happen is you would normally choose your family over everyone else. They say blood is thicker than water. But in the last decade or a little bit more, we have turned our entire culture to where instead of seeing how we can support the culture around us, we want the culture to support us. We have become the centers of our own universe. And because of that egocentric paradigm that we live in, we think that everything is about us. And the outworking of that is, instead of choosing the collective goodness or wholeness of the family, you seek the individual happiness, which is incredibly ironic, because what happens when you get into the social group identity and then eventually into political identity bias, you will now begin to sacrifice your individual self to be part of the collective ideology that the group that you are a part of celebrates. So are we guaranteed to see unrest? Yes. Will families break up, especially over the coming election and everything else? Yes. Do we run the risk, and I mean the high risk, of having yet another civil war? Absolutely. Because you're going to have neighbor against neighbor, and you're going to have group against group. If you don't believe me, go down the road in your neighborhood and put a political sign for one side of the fence in one yard and a political sign for the other side of the fence in the other yard, and watch how quickly the neighborhood will form groups around each sign. Instead of seeing them as neighbors, they see them as parts of coming into the collective identity of the group of the sign. Psychology can be very strange. All right, guys, if you are still here, do me a favor, click on one of these other videos. I'll be back sooner than you think in the next one. See you then.